reading day, and that means we're going to be reading from The Spirits of Christmas, The Dark Side of the Holidays. Be back in a minute. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Happy Sunday, everybody. How is everybody doing? I hope you said good. My name is Charlotte. Give me a second here. I have to start up TikTok, and then we can start rolling on this. Let me make sure I have my chat set up. Lots of buttons to push. There we go. Let me get over on TikTok here and get started. And live isn't working, so we won't be going on TikTok. Well, that answers that. I don't think I'm blocked. I just think they don't have lives working right now. I don't see anybody on live. Anyway, okay. Well, that answers that. Welcome, everybody. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong, up and down the state, which means if you think you have a paranormal issue, we can get to you. It may take us a while, but we definitely can get to you. So I'm real excited about this, and you know what I'm thinking? I'm going to do one check real quick. Let me look over here. I have a feeling that there's no lives. They don't have lives. Live is not working yet for people. Let me see. Republicans really model themselves after Orban's Hungary. Sorry about that. Let me see what we got going on. Yeah, there is no one live. So they are having live. Okay, I'm just going to shut this off, so it's not a problem. Yeah, there's nobody live at all right now. So they're having trouble with the live mechanism on TikTok. Okay. Anyway, welcome everybody. Like I said, if you think you might have a paranormal need, we can help you with that. It might take us a while, but we definitely can help you with that. California is a big state, lots of farmland and things like that. Let me get back on track. Lots of farmland and things like that, and it'd take us a while to get to you, but we will get to you. The process works really easy. You get a hold of me via email, or and then I'll call you, and then I interview you, and and that's how easy it's easy as 1, 2, 3. Easy as 1, 2, 3. Well, we're going to continue this book. I don't know how far we have to go in it. We've been reading it for the past 8 weeks, the past 8 Sundays, and I think we're just past the halfway point. It's been an interesting book. You can see I've still got the holiday thing going on behind me. And that's because we might as well just do the holiday thing until we finish the book, right? Because we're talking about Christmas Eve stories, and we're talking about things like, other things related to the holidays, so we might as well just continue with it. So, like I said, we may finish today. We might finish next week. I have no idea. But when we do finish, this is the thing I want to do with everybody, including everybody on TikTok who can't hear me right now, but including everybody on TikTok, what I would like to do is I would like to go over some books with you guys, because the majority of the books we get, if they're not permission from the authors, the majority of the books that we get are from Gutenberg.com. It takes me a while. Give me a second. And yeah. Let me see something real quick. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. See, they're just not working, the lives. Everything's working but that. Anyway, I'm from Gutenberg.com, which means a lot of the books were written in the 1800s up until 1944. So you're looking at a lot of classics. Like, we have read Dracula and we have read Frankenstein here, and they've been really fun to read because they're a lot different than the movies. So I was thinking that, as after we get done with this book, that would be something we can vote on. I was thinking maybe the Phantom of the Opera would be kind of cool, to get into a book like that and read that one, because it's either going to be, it's either going to be true paranormal stories, or it's going to be like those. It's just going to be like fantasy stories like that. Okay, so it'd be kind of fun to do. So I thought I would get like 3 books. I would pick 3 books, and then you guys could vote on them, and then we would read them every Sunday. Okay. Yeah, let me turn this off because what's happening is that it's replaying the same video over and over. Well, never mind. It's gonna be like that today. It'll just be busy on TikTok. Repetition's a good thing. All right. So when we left off, we had a book. We had a story about World War II. I think it was World War II. And these planes had taken off. It was a British airfield, and these planes had taken off, and they were waiting for them to come back, which was customary because that time they didn't have the same, the communication stuff like we have now. And they were waiting for these planes to come back, and of course some didn't come back and all this stuff. But one plane did come back. One plane came back, and it turned out to be a plane from World War I, and it brought a message back from from one of the missing planes that had gone down the ocean. Interesting story, you know. So that's where we left off. So the next section we're going to start in is called Back Already, with a question mark. And so we'll start. We'll read that. We'll read for about an hour, and then we're going to call it a day. Okay, and then we'll call it a day. And I just want to put out there the whole week this week we have a full schedule of shows. Those will be 5 p.m. Pacific every day. We're starting out with our good friend Lynn Monet for part 2 of her interview that we started, gosh, over a month ago. But she's going to be with us. And then Wednesday, we've got John Shapeshift. And Wednesday and Thursday, it's Elvis Presley's 90th birthday month. I thought it would be fun to have our good Barry Strom come on and do a channeling session with him at his board, and we could ask Elvis all kinds of questions if you guys are interested in that. So that's what we're going to be doing on Thursday, and of course Nancy Matz will be with us on Wednesday. Tuesday will be a surprise show, so we'll see what that's going to be about. I'm going to have a surprise guest, but we're launching out of here, and just like after I get done here tonight, I'm going to have dinner, and then I'm going to be back in here booking guests for the show for the rest of the month. So yeah, we're starting to launch. It feels good to be relaunching. In addition to my 7 p.m. every day, that usually goes Monday through Saturday for my TikTok show that I do over there on TikTok, and my tarot card readings and other fun stuff that we do. So yeah, so this is all in addition to that. So we're starting to roll right along, and hopefully we get the RSS feed caught up and all that good stuff. I have been eating rock candy, so I'm feeling no pain right now. All right. Well, let's get going with this book, and we'll read for about an hour, and then we'll call it, and we'll continue next week. And who knows, we might finish. I don't know where we're at, okay? So it's called Back Already. In the wide body of paranormal writings, there is a very specific type of ghost sighting called a crisis apparition. In this situation, the witness sees a friend or a loved one who appears to be present in the room, but who could possibly be there, because at that very moment, they just died, or were dying. A theory for this unnerving event is that when someone is going through extreme physical or emotional trauma, as at the point of death, they are somehow able to send a telepathic message to someone with whom they have a strong bond. Crisis apparitions are fascinating, but sometimes they are hard to verify. Many times the witness who experiences the crisis apparition is alone, or tells someone about their sighting after the fact. There is a famous report, though, that disproves that rule. British RAF pilot David McConnell appeared to his roommate at the exact moment McConnell, was dying. But not only did the roommate not realize McConnell was a ghost, he told several people about seeing McConnell well before he got the news of the plane crash that killed his friend. On December 7th, 1918, McConnell had orders to fly his plane from the Scampton base in Lincolnshire to the base at Tadcaster. He left at 11:30 that morning, telling his roommate, Lieutenant Larkin, that he planned to take the train back and return to base in time for afternoon tea. At 3:25 that afternoon, Larkin was in the room he and McConnell shared, sitting in front of the stove fire and writing letters. Larkin heard a clatter in the hallway. McConnell was an energetic guy, and it wasn't unusual to hear him coming a mile away. Larkin grinned and turned in his chair to face his friend. McConnell was already halfway through the doorway. He was wearing his full flying kit, with his cap pushed back on his head. "Hello, boy," McConnell called. "Hello," Larkin replied. "Back already?" "Yes." "Got there all right? Had a good trip," McConnell said. "Well, cheerio." He banged the door shut and went off down the hallway. Larkin turned back to the book he was reading and lit a cigarette. At 3:45, there was a knock on the door. It was Lieutenant Garner Smith looking for McConnell. All the men had plans to go into Lincoln that evening. He's back. He just came into the room a few minutes ago, Larkin told him. Garner Smith left. Still in search of McConnell, Larkin went down to the mess hall for tea, then got dressed, and went to Lincoln to join his friends. As Larkin walked into the smoking room of the Albion Hotel, he overheard a group of officers talking in solemn tones. Larkin tried not to eavesdrop on their hushed conversation, but the words he heard made his blood run cold. Tadcaster, McConnell, and crashed. This was too much for Larkin, and he nosed his way into the officers' conversation. They told him that just before they had left the base, they'd gotten word that David McConnell had indeed crashed his camel while trying to fly the plane through dense fog to Tadcaster. The next morning, Larkin had a long conversation with Lieutenant Garner Smith. The other lieutenant tried to convince Larkin that somehow he'd been mistaken about seeing McConnell at 3:30 the previous afternoon. Larkin, though, was adamant. Larkin later wrote to McConnell's father, trying to explain his strange experience. He told the older McConnell that he and David had known each other for 4 months, but had only been roommates for about 6 weeks. While they'd had plenty of discussions about political and social topics, not once had they ever discussed anything remotely spiritual, let alone talked about the paranormal. In his letter, Larkin tried to explain his confusion by talking through it. I was at a loss to solve the problem. There was no disputing the fact that he had been killed whilst flying to Tadcaster, presumably at 3:25, as we ascertained afterwards that his watch had stopped at that time. I tried to persuade myself that I had not seen him or spoken to him in his room. But I could not make myself believe otherwise, as I was undeniably awake, and his appearance, voice, manner, had all been so natural. Next one is Told You So. The hunger to know what comes after physical death can't be denied. It's why we read books like the one I'm holding at this very moment. We'll all find out eventually, of course, but for some people, the compulsion to sneak a peek behind the veil is very tempting. For centuries, people have been making arrangements with trusted friends or loved ones. Whoever dies first should come back and try to communicate with the one left behind. And if the stories are to be believed, sometimes it works. The people trying these experiments aren't crackpots. One of these curious people was Lord Henry Brougham, a British statesman who lived during the 19th century. He and his college friend, Geoffrey Garner, were keenly interested in the possibility that a person's soul could survive the death of their body. So, intrigued were they, that the two friends drew up an agreement that whichever of them died first would appear to the other. They signed this compact in their own blood. They were not playing. When the men graduated from college, Brougham entered government service. Garner also got a government post and was sent off to India. Over the years, the two men gradually lost touch with each other. It wasn't until many years later, when Lord Brougham was traveling in Sweden, that he had cause to remember his college friend Garner. Brougham and his travel companions had stopped at an inn for the night, and Brougham wanted a hot bath after his day's journey. He had a nice relaxing soak and was just about to get out, towel off, and head off to bed when he turned his head to look around the bathroom for a towel. There, sitting on a chair, was his friend Geoffrey Garner. Brougham lunged out of the bath, tripped, and passed out. How I got out of the bath I know not, he wrote later, but on recovering my senses, I found myself sprawling on the floor. The apparition, or whatever it was, that had taken on the likeness of Garner, had disappeared. Brougham was shaken by the sudden appearance of his college friend that he hadn't seen in years, and in his bath, no less. He was further shocked to discover, when he returned home to England, that Geoffrey Garner had died in India on December 19th, the same day Brougham had seen him. Next one is Dear Theodosia. To students of history, many Broadway fans, the name of Aaron Burr is synonymous with base treachery for his killing of Alexander Hamilton in a duel in 1804. But fans of the musical Hamilton also know Burr as the adoring papa of Theodosia Burr. Theodosia was Aaron Burr's only child, and she and her father were devoted to each other. After the duel between Hamilton and Burr on July 11, 1804, Burr found himself on the outs politically. He left New York and knocked around for a while, and even managed to get himself accused of treason in 1807 for trying to set up an empire in Mexico. He was later acquitted, but went off to Europe in a self-imposed exile. Throughout all of this, Theodosia was Burr's staunchest supporter. She married Joseph Alston, himself a politician, but she never swayed in her devotion to her father. In 1812, Burr returned to New York and immediately wrote to Theodosia to ask her to come see him now that he was back home. Theodosia, although she wasn't in the best of health, jumped at the chance to visit her father. Earlier that year, in June, Theodosia had lost her 10-year-old son Aaron Burr Alston to malaria. She had been frail since the boy's birth, and it's possible she was suffering from uterine cancer. On December 10th, 1812, Joseph Alston had been elected governor of South Carolina. With the duties of this new position, he couldn't take time off to accompany Theodosia to New York. The War of 1812 was in full swing, and travel on the Atlantic was dangerous. But Theodosia was so eager to see her father, who'd been away in Europe for years, that she bought a passage on the Patriot and headed north. Soon after the ship's departure from Charleston, South Carolina, on December 30th, the Patriot vanished without a trace off the coast of the Carolinas. Rumors swirled around Theodosia's fate. Stories flew that she had killed herself after resisting the advances of the pirate Octave Chauvet, or that she had written farewell letters to her husband and her father, and had put them into a champagne bottle, which she threw into the sea before being executed, or that she had been captured and taken to Bermuda as a pirate's mistress. One particularly fanciful tale claimed that she had ended up in Texas, on the Gulf Coast, and had married an Indian chief. Native American chief, guys. A clue to Theodosia's possible fate came in 1819, with the execution of John DeFargus and Robert Johnson. In an article published in the New York Advertiser, the condemned men claimed to have been crew members aboard the ill-fated Patriot. They said they had led a mutiny and had scuttled the ship, killing all on board. But the most solid evidence came to light in 1878 with the publication of an article in the New York Times. A fellow named Benjamin Burdick, described as a hard, rough old salt, had made a deathbed confession at a poorhouse in Michigan. He told the minister's wife that he'd been a sailor on a pirate ship that had overtaken the Patriot. The minister's wife wrote up what Burdick told her and reported the tale to the paper. He said there was only one lady on board who was beautiful, intelligent, and cultivated, who gave her name as Mrs. Theodosia Alston. When her turn came to walk the fatal plank, she asked for a few moments to time, which was gruffly granted her. She then returned to her berth and changed her apparel, appearing on deck in a few moments, clad in pure white garments, and with a Bible in her hand. She announced that she was ready. She appeared as calm and composed as if she were at home, and not a tremor crept over her frame, or a pallor overspread her features as she walked toward her fate. As she was taking the fatal steps, she folded her hand over her bosom and raised her eyes to heaven. She fell and sank without a murmur or sigh. This story lends credence to an oddity that turned up in Nags Head, North Carolina, after the Civil War, a portrait owned by a woman who was quite elderly at the time. Her family said she had made a living by looting ships that ran aground in the Outer Banks. In 1813, a vessel had been attacked by pirates and drifted into the family's clutches. They found no one on board, but they did find some valuables that the pirates had overlooked, including the portrait of a dark-haired pretty woman in white. Descendants of Aaron Burr have noted that the portrait's resemblance to Theodosia. Theodosia Burr Alston's spirit has a wide-ranging territory. She is seen at her plantation house in South Carolina, and her spirit, at least, has finally reached her father's home in New York. One If by Land, Two If by Sea is a restaurant in Greenwich Village that is located in a carriage house once owned and operated by Aaron Burr. Theodosia has been seen floating through the restaurant wearing a long flowing white dress. In life, she is said to have adored wearing jewelry, especially glittery earrings. Women sitting at the restaurant's bar have reported that someone invisible tends to tug on dangling earrings. Theodosia's ghost, again wearing the same flowing white dress, has also been seen near the Cape Hatteras lighthouse. She appears there most often during foul weather or on foggy nights. Her ghost roams these sandy beaches because of one of history's most bizarre coincidences. In 1773, Alexander Hamilton was a passenger on a boat called the Thunderbolt when it was caught in a storm off of the Outer Banks. The captain of the boat tried to make for shore, but there was no lighthouse to guide him. He then tried to ride out the storm off of Cape Hatteras, but high waves pummeled the boat. The rocking of the ship spilled glowing coals out of the stove onto the wooden floor of the galley and started a fire that nearly spelled disaster for the Thunderbolt. Luckily, the fire was contained, and when the gale winds died, the ship limped into port. After that harrowing experience, Hamilton, sorry about that line making noises, Hamilton swore that someday he would make sure that a lighthouse was built on Cape Hatteras. After the Revolutionary War, Hamilton, oh no, I'm losing my connection. Hamilton was appointed Secretary of the Treasury. Here was his chance to make good on his promise of a decade before. He twisted arms to get congressional appropriation for a lighthouse at Cape Hatteras. One of the arms he twisted was that of Aaron Burr. Burr was irked at Hamilton's manipulations, and his irritation only fanned the flames of the feud between the two men. Okay, guys, hang on. I'm going to try and fix the camera. God dang it. Dang nabbit. Probably because I messed with this. Hang on. Hang on, you guys. I'm trying to get this camera back in. Let me get it back in. I need light too, so hang on. Okay, we're back. Just give me this. Let me reset this. Okay. I figured out what it is. I have a weird connection on the camera. So let me get this up. Okay, I came up too much. Take it down one more. Okay. Alright, back to the book. See, I actually figured out what the problem is because I came in because I had bolted down my cell phone over here for the show. And then I had touched the wire's been like touchy. Anyway, so flames of the feud between the two men, decades later, the Patriots' gruesome end came not far from the Cape Hatteras lighthouse. The same beacon built by Theodosia's father's bitter rival, unfortunately for Theodosia, the lighthouse did nothing to save her. But it could have. There's a theory that the Patriot was not attacked at sea, but rather lured to shore by pirates working on land, who shone a light at Nag's Head to confuse the Patriot's captain. If the captain had followed the beacon at Cape Hatteras instead, he wouldn't have been taken by the false light. We wouldn't have half the ghost stories we do if it weren't for the history behind them. Next section is called Last Wishes. Hi, Marisa. How goes it? Welcome. Jim Curran knew he was dying. The old man was nearing the end of his earthly life, and he had made his peace. He lived in the small town of Holyrood on Canada's Atlantic seaboard, and he loved the land he'd made his home. When I go, Curran told his son-in-law, James Butler, I want to be buried in the new cemetery on the south side of the village. And if you don't bury me there, I'll haunt you. You won't have a moment's peace. The headstrong old man passed away just before Christmas. His funeral was to be officiated by Father Walsh. As Butler made the final arrangements, he mentioned to Father Walsh that Curran's last wishes had included burial in the new cemetery. I'm afraid that's not possible, the priest explained. Last wishes or no, I can't, in no good conscience, bury your father-in-law in there. It hasn't yet been consecrated. We'll bury Mr. Curran in the North Side Cemetery. If he does come back to haunt anyone, let it be me. I'm the one responsible." Butler agreed. He wanted to honor Curran's last wishes, but he certainly didn't want his loved one buried in unconsecrated ground either. "As long as he haunts you, and not me, I'm fine with that," Butler said. The funeral was held on a snowy afternoon, just after Christmas. Jim Curran was laid to rest in the property, consecrated Northside Cemetery. Family and friends drifted away to mourn in private, and Father Walsh and his driver Harry headed for home. The snow that had started to fall during the graveside service got worse, and soon Harry found the road blocked. He took what he thought was a shortcut across a frozen pond, but he was soon hopelessly lost. 3 hours passed before Harry saw any familiar landmarks. Priest and driver made it home safely, but they were late, cold, and hungry by the time they got there. Harry, who was superstitious, swore that Jim Curran's ghost had led them astray. All that week, as Father Walsh made his rounds in the parish, he heard members of his congregation muttering that Jim Curran should have been buried in the New South Side Cemetery after all. The next Sunday, Father Walsh took to the pulpit to explain the reasons for this decision. The parishioners might have been soothed by the sermon, but Jim Curran's ghost still wasn't convinced. Late that night, Father Walsh heard a knock at his front door. He went to answer it, but there was no one there. Before he could close the door, he heard footsteps come into the house, cross the floor, and go up the stairs to a bedroom on the second floor. The next day, Father Walsh had a visitor, a friend of his who was a priest in a nearby town. Without any prompting, Father O'Donnell asked about the visitor the previous night. Father Walsh denied that any visitor had showed up, but Father O'Donnell just lifted an eyebrow, daring Father Walsh to tell the truth. Three weird occurrences in just over a week were enough to convince Father Walsh. He consecrated the Southside Cemetery immediately. The first burial there, of course, was a reburial. Jim Curran's grave was opened, and his body was moved to the new cemetery. Neither Father Walsh nor anyone else ever heard from Jim Curran's ghost again. Curran was finally able to rest in peace. Next story is the New York Museum ghost. The town of York, England. Oh, the York Museum ghost, I'm sorry. The town of York, England, is incredibly ancient by American standards. Many cultures have put their stamp on it. Romans, Vikings, Saxons, Celts, Normans, all putting a facet on this jewel of the North. And relics of all these bygone people who lived and died in York are housed in the York Museum. In 1953, a haunting began at the museum that involved a book with a blue cover. It was just an ordinary book, but for one returning spirit, it seemed to hold great importance. It started on a Sunday evening in September 1953. There was a meeting going on at the museum, so the caretaker, Mr. George Jonas, was waiting for it to be over so he could lock up the building. Jonas and his wife were downstairs. As people filed out, Jonas made a cup of tea before going upstairs for a final sweep of the building. But Mrs. Jonas said, "Are you sure everyone's gone?" She heard footsteps above them, and listening, Mr. Jonas did too. "It's probably the curator. I'll go up and tell him I'll be turning the lights off soon," Jonas said. He went up the stairs, heading for the curator's office. I gotta fix this. This is gonna drive me nuts with this wire. There was an elderly stranger in the office instead. He was in the far corner of the room, bent over as if looking for something. As Jonas came into the office, the stranger stood up, turned around, and walked right past Jonas, out of the office. "Pardon me, sir, but are you looking for someone?" Jonas asked. The stranger, who was dressed in an old-fashioned frock coat and trousers, ignored him. The old fellow went straight across the hall through the open door into the library. Jonas followed him, turning on the lights as he came into the room behind the odd stranger. "I must find it," I must find it, the old gentleman muttered to himself. He crossed the library to a bookshelf and ran his finger down the spines of the books. By this time, Jonas was feeling a bit miffed at being so roundly ignored, but he thought that perhaps the old fellow was hard of hearing, or even stone deaf. Jonas walked closer to the old man. If you want to see the curator, Mr. Wilmot, I'd be glad to escort you to his house. As Jonas spoke, he reached out to touch the gentleman's shoulder to get his attention. Just before Jonas's fingers brushed the tweed of the old fellow's jacket, the man vanished. Jonas stood completely still for a few moments while his mind tried to process the old man's sudden disappearance. His gaze wandered to the floor. There was a book with a blue cover lying there. It had fallen from the old gentleman's hands as he vanished. Idly, Jones noted the title, Antiquities and Curiosities of the Church. Then his mind caught up with the situation. He raced down the stairs and bundled his wife out of the door. Time to go, let's go, now we need to go. The next morning, Jonas went to work at the museum as usual. His first stop was the library. The blue book was still lying on the floor where the ghost had dropped it. Jonas shook his head, so he hadn't imagined it after all. He told the museum's curator the odd story. 4 Sundays later, Mr. Jonas was at it again. The museum and the ghost returned. The spirit looked just as solid as before. Jonas later swore he looked like a very real person, but this time the old man, in bordering dress, went from the office across the hall to the library and walked through the locked door to get there. This was just weird enough that Mr. Jonas decided to bring someone else with him when he worked his Sunday hours. On the 4th Sunday after that, Jonas and a friend walked into that library and heard the quiet shuffling of someone turning the pages of a book. A flash of blue caught their eyes, and a book dropped to the floor as they watched. It was the same book the old man had pulled off the shelf. The first time Jonas had encountered him. Enough was enough. The ghost was following a pattern of appearing every 4th Sunday. So on the 4th Sunday in December, a group of 6 men gathered with Mr. Jonas in the library of the New York Museum. Jonas had gone to his doctor to make sure he wasn't just imagining things, and had invited the doctor to come to the library to see the manifestation for himself. Along with Jonas and his doctor were a lawyer and a reporter from the Yorkshire Evening Press. Mr. James Jonas, the caretaker's brother, was also there, mostly because he thought his brother's story was complete nonsense. George Jonas took the blue book off the shelf to show it to everyone. As it turned out, the book had a business card pasted inside the front cover. Antiquities and Curiosities of the Church had once belonged to Alderman Edward Wooler, a lawyer who collected antiques. The alderman had collapsed and died at a meeting nearly 30 years before. The old gentleman had always arrived around 7:40 p.m. Everyone in the room sat tensely, watching the clock as the minutes ticked past. At exactly 7:42, the slim blue book slowly slid into the edge of the bookshelf, as if drawn out by an invisible hand. It gently dropped from the shelf onto the floor, still standing upright. Everyone in the library was shocked, except for George Jonas. He was relieved not to have been the only witness this time. Everyone else agreed that, yes, without a doubt, there was something supernatural going on in that library every 4th Sunday. And now, there was a possible identity for the ghost. Alderman Wooler. But not everyone welcomed the idea of a ghost in the library. Mr. Wilmot, who had held the post of curator for the past 4 years, was open to the idea of investigating the phenomenon. After all, the apparition, whoever he was, had now been experienced by 9 people. However, the museum was overseen by the Yorkshire Philosophical Society, and they roundly pooh-poohed the very thought of the paranormal. The Society's chairman groused, "It is too silly for words. There will be no investigation. I would not let the subject be brought before the council of the Society. I would not waste time on such tripe." Wilmot was so incensed at the chairman's dismissive attitude that he handed in his resignation. In the meantime, Jonas and his associates went ahead with the investigation. Jonas was ill on the fourth Sunday in January, so he wasn't able to ghost hunt that evening. But on the next fourth Sunday, February 7th, 1954, 12 men sat quietly in the museum's library. George Jonas was feeling much better, and he was joined by several professionals, including members of the Society for Psychical Research. The men locked the door of the library to make sure they could conduct their investigation undisturbed. They got to the museum in plenty of time. They began the session at 7:15, 25 minutes before the ghost's usual arrival time, 7:40. Unfortunately, the haunting seemed to have run its course. Whether Jonas's absence in January knocked the ghost off his schedule, or the spirit had finally been satisfied with pulling the book off the shelf several times, we'll never know. But nothing happened in February, save for a small wandering cold spot. And on March 7th, the next Sunday in the cycle, nothing at all happened. The spirit was gone, but the snark remained. During those weeks of waiting for the ghost to show up, some of the more open-minded members of the Yorkshire Society started asking questions about Mr. Wilmot's resignation. A special meeting was held to inquire into the circumstances. There were, it was reported later, some bitter attacks and some strong defense. Who knew philosophers could get so worked up? The result of the meeting was that the members of the society voted overwhelmingly to ask Wilmot to stay on as the museum's curator. Wilmot had been about to leave for another position, but he agreed to stay. Politics being what they are, this was followed by a flurry of other resignations. At its annual meeting, 2 months later, the Yorkshire Society had a completely new 12-member council. There was one person who was sad to see the museum ghost go. Alderman Wooler's grandson heard of the ghost and realized that the description of the gentleman fit his grandfather exactly. He was thrilled to have a ghost in the family. After the experience of December 53, the ghost has never been seen again. But there are people who say that if you're in the York Museum Library doing research or simply reading a book, you may notice that the room seems unnaturally cold. Maybe the old fellow is still lurking in the library. Next one is the sea captain's ghost. The coast of Donegal, Ireland, is one of the most picturesque places in that country. Small islands off the coast provide a breakwater, some small protection from the angry, storm-lashed waters of the Atlantic. The islands of Inishni, Gola, and Inisman form a perfect natural harbor for passing ships to seek refuge in a storm. Around Christmas one year, in the early part of the 20th century, a small sailing ship came into the harbor to resupply. The ship had been battling her way through a prolonged storm, and supplies were running low. The captain and 2 of his men rowed to the harbor from the ship. They barely made the trip safely, even with the protection of the islands. The waters of the harbor were a seething, boiling cauldron of foam, and it was evening by the time they landed. The islanders guided the small boat safely to shore and welcomed the 3 men. The captain loaded the skiff with supplies and was determined to make it back to his ship that night. The captain was a frequent visitor to the island and was well liked. The islanders begged him to stay until the fury of the storm slackened, but the captain was adamant. He and his 2 companions pushed off into the darkness. The next morning, the fears of the islanders had come true. In the darkness of the storm, the unfamiliar harbor and the storm-racked waters had bested the small skiff. A man walking the beach looking for salvageable items from the wrecks found the small boat. It had been smashed to splinters by the pounding waves. Near it was the battered, broken body of the captain. The bodies of the other 2 sailors were never found. The tragedy hit the islanders hard. The island was home to just a handful of people who kept horses and cattle grazing on the tough forage there. The islanders were devastated that despite their best efforts to convince them to stay, the captain and his companions had taken their chances on the dangerous waters, and now they were gone. The islanders felt the loss as though it had been family members who drowned. After the tragedy, the settlers drew together for companionship. Soon afterward, they began to spend their evenings together in one house in an effort to keep the loneliness at bay. One evening, as they sat around the fire chatting, they heard footsteps approaching the door. The walkway leading to the door was made of fine, soft sand, yet they still heard footsteps, as if someone was coming towards the house on hard-packed earth. Everyone on the island was there in the house, so they figured it must be a stranger. They all looked eagerly towards the door, ready to welcome the traveler to their fireside. The door swung open, and there stood a tall, broad-shouldered man, the captain, who had been buried just a few days previously. Every person in the room recognized him. A woman sitting in the corner said in Irish, "Oh God, there's the captain." One of the men found his voice and greeted the captain in his native Irish speech, saying, "Come in." But the figure in the doorway simply stepped back and disappeared. The islanders rushed out into the night, but they didn't find anyone near the house. The captain had vanished into the dark winter night, never to be seen again. Wow. Next story is The Frozen Lovers. A few days before Christmas, 1850, a small boat dropped anchor off Jameson's Point near Rockland, Maine. The captain was not on board. Rumor had it that he had gone ashore for a drink, and not his first, and that the schooner's owners had fired him for his hard-drinking ways. Whatever the reason, the boat was lacking a captain. The first mate, believing strongly in the old adage, "When the cat's away, the mice will play," had recently proposed to a beautiful young woman. With the captain gone, the first mate saw no reason not to enjoy the company of his bride-to-be. He invited her to stay in his cabin on the schooner for a few days. Only the mate, his young lady, and one deckhand were aboard the boat on December 22nd, when a vicious storm whipped up and snapped the boat's anchor cable. With only 2 men to guide the schooner, it soon ran aground on the rocky shore near Owl's Head. The boulders held the boat in place, so luckily it didn't sink, but it did fill with seawater. The 3 people aboard huddled for warmth on the deck. Waves crashed over the deck, drenching the 3 in freezing spray. Their clothes began to grow stiff with ice. The first mate took charge. His plan was for all 3 of them to roll up together in a wool blanket and lie down next to the stern rail, as far out of the wind as spray as possible. The mate knew they couldn't avoid the spray altogether, but he hoped it would freeze on the blanket and form a protective shell of ice around them. His plan worked, but it worked too well. The waves continued to pummel the boat all night, and the spray froze into ice more quickly than the mate had anticipated. The ice built into a suffocating layer several inches thick. By the time the sky grew gray with the dawn, the first mate and his fiancée were unconscious. The deckhand mourned his companions, but was glad to find himself alive at the end of that chilling night. He used a small knife to chip away at the ice, then smashed his way free with hands that bled from the shards of icy cold. He staggered to his feet and saw that the tide had gone out. A narrow, rocky bridge now connected the boulders to the shore. The winds of the storm still blew, but at least the deckhand could stumble towards dry land and salvation. He headed for the lighthouse at Owl's Head. Even through the battering storm, the light still shone. He fixed his mind on the light and headed for it, crawling the last 50 yards on bloodied hands and knees. He reached the lighthouse, and the keeper hurried him into the warmth of the house's kitchen. Shivering under a blanket, his hands wrapped tightly around a mug of hot soup, the deckhand stammered out his amazing story of survival. The lighthouse keeper was reluctant to go out into the storm to retrieve 2 corpses, but he organized a rescue party just in case. The men found the pair curled up in a tight embrace and frozen in a solid block of ice. The rescuers used chisels and picks to free the storm's victims. Everyone was sure the two were dead. But even so, they were rushed to a home near the lighthouse in an attempt to revive them. They were stripped and placed in cool water baths. Rescuers gently massaged the cold limbs, searching for the faintest signs of life. In about 2 hours, the woman's eyes fluttered open, and she struggled back to consciousness. An hour after that, the first mate stirred too. The two snatched from death's icy grip. Took several months to recover. But in June, the first mate and his radiant bride stood together in front of a preacher and promised to love each other till death do us part. Okay. All right. The Ghost Cat. The paranormal writer Jeff Ballinger is a tireless collector of weird tales in his book, Our Haunted Lives, True Ghost Story Encounters. He shares some of these wonderful stories. Susie Lehman had a beloved cat, affectionately named Fat Kitty. Fat Kitty was a beloved member of the family and stayed devoted to them even after death. Susie's son was born prematurely, and the spirit of Fat Kitty seemed to watch over the tiny human. Susie would see glimpses of a shadow cat under her son's bassinet. She'd also noticed that the bedspread at the foot of her bed, which was the corner of the bed closest to the bassinet, was constantly mussed, as if a cat had been sitting on it, keeping watch. Fat Kitty had one litter, and Susie kept two of the kittens. One, named Calico, spent her life utterly fascinated by Christmas trees and the decorations that adorn them. One afternoon, after she'd lost Calico, Susie was in the house by herself. She happened to walk through the living room and gave the Christmas tree a looking over, making sure it was just the way she wanted it. Just then, one of the ornaments at the bottom of the tree started moving. That's what Calico always loved to do. She loved to run by and slap on the ornament, or lay up underneath it and slap it. I don't know what made me do this, but I looked at that ornament and I said, Calico, just leave the tree alone. And it stopped immediately. My husband saw it do the same thing. It was always one particular ornament on one particular part of the tree that she used to play with. Susie smiled, knowing that Calico was still enjoying her shiny, swinging toy. Saying goodbye. Sometimes the spirits of the animals we love come back, and sometimes those spirits are given the chance to say their goodbyes to us, just as people do. The French scientist Camille Flammarion was also an investigator of psychic phenomena. In 1912, in his scientific journal, Annales des Sciences Psychiques, he published a story that Mr. M.G. Grazer had shared with him. Grazer was a very solitary boy, preferring study to socializing. His one companion was his St. Bernard, Bobby, who was with him nearly constantly. On December 14, 1910, Bobby was with Grazer's parents in Lucerne, Switzerland, 2 kilometers from where Grazer was. About 7:30 p.m., I heard the door of my room open and saw Bobby standing in the doorway, looking unhappy. I called him to me. He didn't look up, and he didn't obey my order. I called again. He came, rubbed against my legs, and laid down on the floor at my feet. I bent to stroke him, and he wasn't there. With a sick feeling, Grazer ran to the nearest phone. He dialed the number for Bobby's veterinarian. That's when Grazer found out that Bobby had been put to sleep 2 minutes earlier. Sad. The Death Coach. On the night of December 11th, 1876, a servant of the McNamaras of County Clare in Ireland was making his evening rounds on the estate of Ennistimon. In the dark, he heard the rumbling of wheels on the road. The hour was very late, and the watchman knew no mortal vehicle was expected. He realized that the noise was coming from a phantom coach, a coach that, according to local legend, foretold approaching death. The servant knew that at the appearance of the spectral coach, all of the gates in his path should be opened. Then the ghost coach would not stop at the house for a member of the family, but would only foretell the death of a relative far away. The watchman ran ahead of the spectral carriage, flinging open the gates ahead of it, gasping for breath, hand pressed to stitch in his side, hand pressed to a stitch in his side. He wrenched the gate open with a clang, then threw himself face down on the ground next to it. The carriage rumbled through the open gate as the watchman sobbed for breath. The next day, Admiral Sir Burton McNamara died in London, many miles from Esteban. Sir Geoffrey walks. Geoffrey de Mandeville, Earl of Essex, was quite possibly the most hated man of his time. He lived in England during the 12th century. He was the grandson of a Norman baron who fought alongside William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Geoffrey himself was no stranger to conflict. He played a dangerous game when Stephen and Matilda were jockeying for the crown of England in the 12th century. Geoffrey cheerfully accepted honors and patronage from both of the potential rulers. He was accused of treason against King Stephen in 1141, but was pardoned. After this narrow brush with disaster, Sir Geoffrey became the sheriff and justice of London, as well as Essex, Middlesex, and Hertfordshire. This gave him absolute power over the capital of England of three of its counties. Sir Geoffrey was at the top of the heap, both in wealth and in political influence, but his ascendancy also proved to be his downfall. Sir Geoffrey's ambition made him cruel. He attacked Ramsay Abbey, the fourth richest abbey in England. He evicted the monks and looted the church. He then moved himself and his men into the abbey, using it as his home base to ransack nearby towns. For this plunder and desecration of the church property, he was excommunicated, although he was later given absolution. Sir Geoffrey didn't only attract negative attention from the church. King Stephen, who once again had the upper hand in the power struggle, suspected Geoffrey of collaborating with Matilda. The king sent officers to arrest the earl and take him to London. There, under threat of hanging, Geoffrey was forced to give up the Tower of London and his castles in Essex, his biggest military assets. Although Sir Geoffrey was released after that tussle with the king, he was burning for revenge. He led an open revolt against Stephen, forcing the king to march against him. As part of his campaign, Geoffrey attacked Burnwell Castle, one of the fortresses built by King Stephen to defend against the traitorous earl. The earl's death was almost an anticlimax, the result of raw stupidity on his part. During the siege of the castle, Sir Geoffrey removed his helm for a moment and was shot in the head by a bowman on the castle's rampart. Sir Geoffrey lingered for a few weeks before dying at Mildenhall in Suffolk in September 1144. Because of his excommunication, the earl was denied Christian burial. His body was taken to London, and he was buried there. So why did Sir Geoffrey walk in East Barnet, a suburb of North London? His ghost was to be seen wandering the small village, and at Christmas time, the spook, wearing spurs and a red cloak, could be seen in nearby Trent Park, Cockfosters. The only connection he had with the area was that it had been a small part of his vast territory. Why haunt just this one place? Well, there is another version of Sir Geoffrey's demise that can be considered when discussing his haunting. This story goes that the outlaw earl drowned in a well in Trent Park, near East Barnet. There are also whispers that the earl hid some of the treasure he looted from Ramsay Abbey down that well, and that he is still searching for that chest of gold. This provides a handy, though not historically accurate, explanation for the haunting. Stories can get a little mixed up, during the passing of 900 years. In December 1926, the ghost of Sir Geoffrey returned to East Barnet in fine form. The year before, strange things have been seen and heard in a municipal stable there. In 1926, the district council decided to demolish the stable and repurpose the bricks into a new road. The roadwork had barely started when reports came of Sir Geoffrey walking across the floors of an old house nearby, clanking his spurs on the floorboards. This phenomenon was repeated three times at the same house. Three times, sorry. At the same house, the family experienced several impatient knocks at the front door when there was no human standing there. Excuse me. Then the letterbox rattled, scaring both the family and their dog. Strange noises were heard near the roadworks, also. And a man, walking near the haunted stables at midnight, heard the jingle of the phantom spurs and caught a brief glimpse of an apparition wearing a red cloak. This being December, many London newspapers sent reporters to East Barnet in search of a good ghost story. But, for some reason, many of the reporters wrote excited articles about the ghost, but then denied the reports. This cast serious doubts on the haunting. A small group of local ghost hunters went out to East Barnet late in December to wait for the phantom to appear. They claimed that they did see the Earl dressed in armor, standing in the moonlight. But because of the reporters backpedaling, no one believed them. 6 years later, in December 1932, dozens of people saw Sir Geoffrey's ghost. A ghost hunting group had done some research. The records they had to work with only went back 20 years, but in that time, the ghost had reliably appeared every 6th year. Older residents of East Barnet claimed that the spirit appeared as midnight approached, between the full moon and the last quarter in the month of December. Armed with this information, the group went out for an investigation on Saturday, December 17th, 1932. Just before the moon rose that night, the ghost hunters heard a weird noise off in the distance, a noise like the clanking of spurs. The noise came closer and closer until it was right beside the group. Then it faded, moving away from them. The group slowly followed the sounds of the clanking spurs until they got to a place at the edge of the East Barnet Valley where the land rose just a bit. There was a break in the cloud cover, and there, on a sloping rise, they saw the armored figure of Sir Geoffrey in the faint moonlight. According to the group's report, the glance was a fleeting one, but very distinct, and the sight is fixed in the minds of those who saw it as plainly as if it had been revealed in midday sunlight. The ghost hunters were giddy with excitement. They hoped that the ghost would return either on St. Thomas's Eve, the next Tuesday, or on Christmas Eve, both days being considered especially favorable for ghostly manifestations. St. Thomas was the apostle who doubted the existence of life after death. The group decided to hold another investigation on Christmas Eve, and they invited anyone who wanted to join them to come along. Everyone met hour before midnight on Christmas Eve. The sightseers drifted off in various directions, while the investigators and a few others moved a quarter-mile south of the village to a small wooden bridge across the Pimes Brook. This bridge was connected to the old church path to the road to Cockfosters. As midnight approached, the main group at the bridge started hearing strange noises to the south. They started walking slowly towards those sounds. They followed the stream for a while, walking along the bank, and the noises stopped. The group continued, heading towards the nearby cemetery. Suddenly, the drawn-out howl of a dog split the night. The dog seemed to be wailing in distress. The group stopped, listening tensely, waiting for whatever would happen next. The soulful howl came again, and among the investigators, the ghost hunters didn't dare break the spell of the manifestation by turning on their flashlights, so they stood frozen to the spot. The dog continued to keen, and soon the clanking of ghostly armor was added to the mournful song. "Over there," someone yelled. They all saw the shadowy form of a headless dog fading into the mist. Legend spoke of a hound that often accompanied Sir Geoffrey, but no one alive had ever seen the dog's ghost. Then the group was surrounded by the clank of armor. The ghost of Sir Geoffrey stood in the moonlight for a long moment. Then he, too, melted into the mist as they watched. History doesn't tell us if Sir Geoffrey, and maybe his faithful hound, appeared 6 years after that. But in 1938, the people of England had other things on their mind. But December mists still gather in the valley of East Barnet, and there are plenty of places for ghosts to hide. The Ghost of William Terrace. William Terrace was the Kenneth Branagh of his day, a superstar of the London theatre scene in the 1890s. He was known for playing the heroes in popular melodramas. Handsome, talented, he was royalty of the theatre set and played most often at the Adelphi Theatre in the Strand. And that was where he met a violent end on the evening of December 16th, 1897. Terrace made a habit of dining at the Green Room Club just off the Strand. It was a short walk from the club to Maiden Lane, a narrow street behind the theatre, where he could get into the back door of the Adelphi. All the leading players at the theatre had a key. On December 16th, Terrace walked, as usual, from the club to the theatre, accompanied that evening by John Graves, an elderly friend of his. Chatting together, the two men turned into Maiden Lane. The street was dimly lit. Neither of the men noticed the figure standing across the street in the flickering shadows cast by the gaslit streetlights. The man stood silently. Sorry about that. A dark-eyed figure in a black cloak, his hat pulled down low over his eyes. As the two friends approached the back door, Graves told Terrace good night and walked on. Terrace unbuttoned his frock coat and reached into his pocket for the key. As he slid the key in the lock, the dark figure rushed across the narrow lane and plunged a knife into his back. The knife glanced off the actor's shoulder blade, leaving a bad wound. Terrace staggered around to face his attacker, who struck twice more. The second knife blow landed high up near Terrace's spine. The third pierced the actor directly over the heart. The attack on William Terrace never should have happened. It was the result of a tragic mistake. Terrace's attacker was a bit player at the Adelphi by the name of Richard Arthur Prince. Aged 32, he had come to seek his fortune on the London stage. Unfortunately, Prince was a wretchedly bad actor, and he was lucky to get his bit parts. His fellow bit players at the Adelphi called him Bad Arthur behind his back, but to his face, they cruelly encouraged his vanity and his dreams of fame and fortune. The trouble really started during the play that had previously run at the theatre. The other bit players teased Prince unmercifully, assuring him that he was destined to become one of the greatest actors of all time. They told him that William Terrace himself was insanely jealous of Prince, and had made sure the other actor was relegated to bit parts. They even had Prince pathetically act out Terrace's role as the hero of the show. They commiserated loudly with Prince, saying that Terrace's role really should have gone to him. And all the while, they were laughing at him behind their hands. Prince, already unstable, was consumed by a rabid jealousy towards Terrace. Terrace, meanwhile, was completely unaware of the drama going on backstage. He didn't even know Prince by sight. When that play finished its run, all of the bit players, including Prince, were of course out of work. Prince auditioned for roles elsewhere, but never even made callbacks. He applied to the Actors' Benevolent Fund for unemployment relief, and he also approached other actors for handouts, including William Terrace. Terrace, when asked, unhesitatingly gave Prince a sovereign. This was on the evening of December 15th. The next day, the Actors' Benevolent Fund met and turned down Prince's request for assistance. When he heard the news, Prince asked who the chairman of the committee was. Someone told him Terry, meaning Edward Terry, a comedian. But Prince heard Terrace. The unbalanced man went to a shop and bought a sharp butcher's knife, for 1 shilling, 9 pence, using the sovereign that Terrace had given him. Then, at dusk, he went to Maiden Lane to lie in wait for William Terrace. After the attack, Richard Prince simply stood there while people rushed to the scene. He was seized and arrested immediately. Meanwhile, Terrace was carried into the theater through the door he'd been about to open. He died 20 minutes later, his head cradled by his leading lady, Jessie Millward. Terrace was only 41 years old. The impact of Terrace's death was even felt miles away at his home. That evening, Tom, the actor's 17-year-old son, was playing chess with his younger brother. Mrs. Terrace sat in an armchair nearby. The family terrier dozed contentedly in her lap. A few minutes past 8, the exact time of the stabbing, the little dog suddenly leapt from Mrs. Terrace's lap and ran circles around the room, barking frantically. Then he darted under the table and stayed there, cowering and snapping at something only he could see. The family finally managed to calm the shivering, wild-eyed dog. Half an hour later, a cast member from the play's Secret Service, who had been an eyewitness to the tragedy, knocked on their door with the shattering news. Terrace's son-in-law, a fellow actor named Seymour Hicks, was taken to the Bow Street police station to identify Prince. Prince was raving and foaming at the mouth. He was later found guilty but insane and died in Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum in 1937. Hicks left the police station and went to the Adelphi, where Terrace's body lay on a couch. The actor played the hero even in death. His face was calm and his lips curved in a slight smile. Hicks knelt by the couch to pay his respects to his father-in-law. Years later, Hicks wrote of the experience he had had in the empty room. In the serenity and quiet of the room, I to this day feel sure I heard a voice say to me, "Are there men living such fools as to think there is no hereafter?" That night I knew beyond all the shadow of a doubt that William Terrace and myself would meet again. True to his word, Terrace began haunting his beloved Adelphi almost immediately after his tragic death. Many actors reported hearing strange tapping noises coming from the Terrace's old dressing room. But things didn't really heat up until 1928, over 30 years after Terrace was murdered. Every evening, when he entered the theater by the main lane door, Terrace had been in the habit of giving Jessie Millward's dressing room door a tap with his walking stick as he went down the corridor to his own room. It was his affectionate signal to his leading lady that he had arrived. In 1928, a musical comedy actress named June was using Jessie Millward's old dressing room. It was June's practice not to leave the theater after a matinee. Instead, she would have a light meal brought in from the restaurant, then have a nap on the Chase Lounge until about 7:15 p.m. But the couch didn't provide much rest. As soon as June relaxed enough to drop off to sleep, the couch would start to vibrate, then lurch as if someone were underneath it, kicking the bottom. Then a pale greenish light would form in front of her dressing table mirror, then disappear. June mentioned these things to Ethel Rowland, her dresser. Ethel replied that often, when June was on stage, a knock would sound on the dressing room door, a knock that sounded like someone rapping the door with a walking stick. When Ethel went to answer the door, there was never anyone there. June eventually told the theater veteran at the Adelphi about these strange events. They suggested it might be William Terrace, returning to the theater after the theater he loved so much. The actors held a seance at the theater to try and contact their colleague. Nothing happened during the seance, but afterwards, June was no longer troubled by the noises and the lights in her room. The Adelphi's historian, W.J. McQueen Pope, wrote in 1959 that an apparition of Terrace had been seen only once, outside the theater. A few years before, on a summer's evening, a man who didn't know the story of the murder was walking on Main Lane near the theater's back door, exactly where the stabbing had taken place. He saw a handsome man in old-fashioned clothes coming towards him. The man passed him without a word, but his appearance was so striking that the witness turned for another look. But the man had completely vanished. The witness was sure he just hallucinated the whole thing, until the historian told him about the murder of William Terrace, some 60 years in the past. All right, you guys, that is it for this week. We will continue next week. And like I said, I don't have any idea how far we have to go. So we'll just have to figure that one out. So next week we'll be back to do this. And same time, same place. Okay? And I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And please remember, as I sunk down, and please remember that tomorrow I will be here at 5:30 p.m. Pacific with Lynn Monet, and we're going to be talking about not only the haunted house that she bought, that was very, had some dark stuff going on, but also what happened after, the after effects of living there, and her experiences and what she does now. Okay? So I want to thank all you guys. Thank you for coming tonight, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. I will see you tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.